Hello, foolish mortals, and welcome to another episode of The Geek Garage. I'm your ghost host, Bill Werde, and today I'll be showing you how to make a replica tombstone from Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. But before we get down and dirty, look alive and hit that subscribe button. As my fellow Disney nerds already know, the parks are filled with subtle nods to the Imagineers who designed and built them. Everything from the windows on Main Street to the headstones at the family plot of the Haunted Mansion. I've decided to recreate this tombstone, dedicated to Cliff Hewitt. He was an architect and the interior designer of the Haunted Mansion. But you can easily adapt this method to make your own custom headstone. Now I know you're all dying to get started, so let's dig in. We'll begin by laying out a design on the foam using a reference photo from the Haunted Mansion. I'm going to start with the rounded top of the tombstone. The shape has these shoulders on the sides, which look to be about 4 inches lower than the top and about 1.5 inches in from the sides. I'll draw those out first as our reference point for the arc. The foam is 2 feet by 2 feet, so I'll mark the middle, then I'll start to lightly freehand each half of the arc until I get a nice smooth shape. When I have a line that looks good, I'll firmly trace over it. Next, I'll add the winged hourglass design, which signifies how fleeting time is. I'm not a great artist or anything, so I'll mostly be eyeballing it from the reference photo, but I'll talk you through my thought process. To line it up, we'll use our center mark from the arc, and it looks to start about 1 inch or so below the top and goes to about 1 inch or so below the shoulder line. Then we'll draw the hourglass with the help of a ruler. Now let's take a look at the wings. They start at the top of the hourglass and extend out and down, flush to the bottom, and then swoop back up and connect at the center. So let's make a notch where our end target is, right in the middle. Let's also draw a light guide at the bottom just to keep everything nice and aligned. And just like with the top arc, I'll freehand this lightly until I have a shape I'm happy with, then go over it with a nice firm stroke. With the main design finished, you can move on to the epitaph. I'm going to use some light guidelines to keep everything straight. And again, I'm just eyeballing it. I'm kind of looking at each letter and word in relation to the center. I personally find it easier to work from the inside out, but do whatever works for you. To do the engraving, you'll need a soldering iron. You'll also want to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area, as any dust or fumes from the foam are very toxic. The engraving part is as simple as tracing over your guidelines. Now as you work, you might notice it doesn't cut through the foam quite as easily as it did at first. This is because as the tip transfers heat to melt the foam, it loses its working temperature, so you'll have to give it breaks and let it heat up again. But if you go slow and steady, you'll get a nice smooth finish. Now that we have our design engraved, we're going to glue another foam panel on the back to make it a little bit thicker so it looks more like a real tombstone. And the reason we're doing this after engraving the front is in case you make a mistake, you can always flip it over and start again. And since you have 2 panels, that gives you a couple chances to get it right. Now what you want to make sure though is that you're going to glue the mistakes on the inside of the tombstone so your back is nice and clean. There are a number of glues you can use to attach the panels depending on what type of foam you're using. For this project, I'm using a foam board glue. The most important part is that we seal the edges so it doesn't come loose and split apart later. I'll run a nice thick bead along the edges and spread some evenly on the inside face as well. Use weights or clamps to hold the 2 pieces together and let the glue dry for as long as it says in the instructions. I'll use a heated foam cutter to carve the arched top. You can also do it with a box cutter, but you're going to have to do it in multiple passes. Since I'm using a handheld foam cutter, it's important to keep it at a 90-degree angle for a straight cut. If you have a foam cutting table, this process is even easier. You can use Bondo or a similar filler to seal up any gaps. Then give it a once over with a sanding sponge to blend everything together and hide any seams. You don't need to sand it completely smooth, as any imperfections give it more of that realistic crumbling stone look. Next, we'll roll on our base layer of gray paint. Now there are a million different shades of gray, so choose one that best matches your desired look. Now you might be tempted to use spray paint, but be careful because it can cause a chemical reaction that'll eat through the foam like the acidy blood of a xenomorph. This can actually be used to your benefit if you're trying to achieve certain stone textures, but do some tests on scrap pieces first to find the right balance. Next, I'll sprinkle some textured paint sand over the surface and work it in with the roller. You can also pre-mix it with the paint, but I wanted to try this technique and I was very pleased with the results. Finally, use a chip brush to work the paint into the engraved portions that the roller missed. You can use the stick end of a Q-tip to clean out any unwanted sand or paint that got stuck in the grooves. So now that we have our base layer and our texture, what I'm going to do next is add some aging. I want this tombstone to look like it's been sitting in the graveyard for a while. So to achieve that, I'm going to take some cheap black acrylic paint, mix it with some water in a spray bottle, and kind of just spray it and let it drip down and just give you that rained on, worn down, old tombstone effect. Wipe off any excess with a dry rag. This will really work it into the texture and give it that aged look. And as you can see, the black paint really highlights the stone texture that we added. Once you're happy with the way it looks, it's time to let it dry. So there you have it, you're now ready to dig your own grave. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and murder that like button. And while we do have 999 subscribers already, there's always room for one more. Till next time, stay spooky and beware of hitchhiking ghosts. Ooh.